Afternoon out there in Zoom. How are we?
Good. How are you?
I'm excited to be here. We're at 3 o'clock, so I don't want to keep us waiting. But we're doing our annual read for the Campus Advising Network. Our book this year, The Post-Pandemic Liberal Arts College, A Manifesto for Reinvention. Yes, we're not a small liberal arts college, but also, yes, the things in this book will probably be quite applicable. Our goal for this first session is to get through the setup of the book, where the authors outline some of the problems, how the pandemic may have exacerbated those problems, and then some common terms that we'll use going forward as we do our other sessions and take a deep dive in the solutions proposed by the authors. And I really don't want to say more than that because it's not fun to have anybody talking at you. I want us to talk together. So what I will do is just go ahead and invite Sam Langen to take over and take us through this first little part. And then we can have some discussion. We'll go about 10 to 15 minutes, have some discussion. Then Greg Ite will take the next part, same thing. And then Jesse Shoemaker will come in at the end and give us our definition so that we're all speaking the same language as we look at the potentially brilliant solutions, or we ridicule them because they just absolutely would not work here, however that works out. So, Sam, all yours.
All right, so I'm guessing many of you, like me, looked at this book and said, we're not a liberal arts college. And I was like,
Yeah.
So I wanted to dig in first to how this book relates to EIU. So then, next slide, please. I looked at how they define SLAC on page 10, small in size, residential, priding themselves on high-touch, face-to-face teaching methods. So then I looked at EIU, and I went to our spring 2024 10th day report and found that we have 3,416 on-time, full-time undergraduates. So smallish, I mean, especially when you look at the large neighboring universities close by in our region. Small community size, feels residential. Even if our students are living off of campus, still feels like a community. We're a tight-knit community here in the Charleston-Matching area. And then when you look at just how we identify ourselves on our recruiting materials, next slide, please. Two key things on our recruiting materials. 98% of our classes are taught by faculty. So again, high touch. We're personal. You're going to know your faculty members. It's not going to be a TA. Your faculty member is going to be all doing research somewhere and you're never going to see them. And we have a 14-to-1 teacher to student ratio. So our students know us as we're in the classroom. So again, that high touch, face-to-face experience that they're looking for. And then next, please. And then as far as our small residential community, we tout that you're going to fit in. There's lots of student organizations. There's Greek Life. There's registered student organizations. There's lots of different things for you to do on campus to feel at home once you live here. And we were ranked the second safest college community in the United States. And so you're safe when you're here. We're going to take care of you. We look out for our students and make sure that they're taken care of. So when you start doing that and comparing us to a small liberal arts college, we look a lot the same. So then as I dove further into the intro and looking through what they were experiencing, I started to wonder, okay, they're talking about how we've always done things in the past and should we move forward and change things in the future? And I think that's a conversation we have a lot on campus. So that's something I wanted to throw out to the audience of, where did you see some of the things in the introduction when they're talking about how they're defining themselves and their history and the goals of a small liberal arts college and how that aligns with what we're trying to do at EIU, but honor the history but move forward towards the future. Julian, I love your facial expression when I say that, connecting history to adapting to the future.
I think a lot of the programs in my department are kind of living in that intersectional space and trying to figure it out because we have a strong history of professional prep at EIU. We were originally a teacher college. So that's a strong there, but what professional prep looks like, we serve very disparate, almost polar opposite populations. We have our first time full-time, or relatively speaking, students who are fresh out of school and we're trying to get them ready for whatever's gonna come next. And then we have a growing population of people who have been out there and working, and that we have had a strong tradition of helping. And now we have more ways to help them with more degree programs, but trying to serve populations that are literally on the ends of the spectrum is, which way do you jump? Can you do both?
So full transparency, I'm not in the classroom, I'm an advisor. But one thing I hear from my students time and time again is we seem to be trying to meet them where they are. We're trying to have the online coursework, the virtual opportunities. But quite frankly, a lot of our faculty and staff don't do a lot. And our students struggle, so we're trying to meet them where they are by having them be more flexible options on how to get their education. But we're not very good at doing it in the way. And so that's one of my concerns as an advisor, like, great, we're saying we're adapting and changing and evolving, but are we just doing the same old thing and now just videotaping it and posting it? Is that truly adapting to a virtual education experience, or is it just checking the box? And that's something I worry about, that the pandemic slams us into 100% when we have more room to switch from on-campus in-person classes to virtual classes. But I don't know that a lot of people have really changed their approach since they've had time to do it. Like, yeah, we only had 1 week to do it in spring of 2020. That was 4 years ago. What professors went back and actually changed what they put together in that semester? What professors and instructors are going back and looking at their stuff each semester and really evaluating their pedagogy. I mean, you don't get pedagogy training to become a faculty member at most universities in those departments. You're an expert in the department, but you don't get pedagogy. So that's something that's very interesting to me when I married a PhD and found out the endeavor having education teaching class.
I don't know if some of that, like, we expect the students to be able to do online. Because they come from that, but there are so many students that say they want online that can't handle it. That don't have that, like, accountability, the time management. And also because they're coming from spaces where the high schools can be just pushing them through. And then they get here and they have to do everything on their own and they're not prepared to do that. They have their clientele, they have all this. And so expecting a first time college student to know how to access email and create a calendar and keep up with assignments and discussion posts and all those things, like they have no idea. But the professors coming in are expecting, this is what you wanted, now step up, but the students, one, maybe don't have willingness, or two, don't even know that. So like, it's not just the coming from the professor side, but it's also coming from the student side, if they're not prepared, and how are we helping them in that first semester year learn what it actually means to take it all.
They say I want to learn, but they think it's like it wasn't really thing.
Yeah.
And it's not really at
much
all.
faster pace, we aren't prepared for that.
And they're not really building up from me. Training.
Yeah, it takes
They were
all this
called that.
self-direction and they haven't been self-directed.
So I think that what spoke to me from the introduction was really less about the particular aspects of higher ed pedagogy and more of like the big picture stuff. Two things that really stuck out to me was the idea of chain sickness, right? Which I have a problem with them using Nietzsche. But I understand that the student used Nietzsche, and so they use Nietzsche. They're not using Nietzsche. But, but the idea that, that our students are sick because we have created this culture in which they are continually assessed and pressured to find, this professional development, seek out their careers. There's so much pressure put on them that they're totally, they say that students are collectively burned out. And instead, they're not being, what they seem to be calling for is a search for authenticity, that the college should be about helping students become who they are. That's what a liberal arts education is meant to do. And then the second thing, and I think it's like the conversation about pedagogy brings this to mind, is, that our institutions have a culture of mistrust. That we're not talking to each other, we're not trusting each other to do our jobs and to do them well. And that then makes it impossible for us to think of anything new. So those are two things that I think.
I love that we have this. I touched on both of those that in the prelude. So within the prelude, what I took from that is, go back and do, did the pandemic just expose the problems in higher education and really society at large and where we are right now? Okay, now I can and so then I started looking at issues on and off campus that they brought up in the prelude. So in higher ed, they were looking at mental health and loneliness and exhaustion of the students and the faculty and staff. Are the students underprepared? What is our K-12 system teaching? Are they teaching to test scores? Or are they teaching to a zest and a joy for learning? Versus, no, you have to learn this fact and be able to regurgitate it. Versus, isn't it fun learning about this new culture or this new science or this new math? Higher education is worried about meeting the bottom line. And it's reality. Like, yes, we don't want to be a business, but at the same time, we have to be a business in order to run. And then the distrust, which you nailed it. Like, are we just, as faculty and administrators, figureheads talking in the view of the students, and faculty and staff's view as administration and administration's view of us? Are we using archaic means to teach? Are we evolving? Are we looking at ways to relate to this new generation of students? And are the students just here to get the piece of paper because they told us what they're supposed to do? Are they really using the college experience to explore their passions and then figure out how to use their passions in their career? Which then I think reflects on exactly that in society. So we look at mental health. People are unsatisfied and they're not able to find balance, whether that balance is between reality and virtual reality and social media, or work and home balance, or growing and maintaining. We've narrowed our definition of success in a lot of ways. Like, you have to earn your college degree as fast as possible, and then on social media, you have to have a big house, a fancy car, and the latest technologies, and that's how you're successful. Like, where did happiness go? Where did self-fulfillment go? And then that feeds into the economic struggles of, are they coming here to learn about their passions and discover new things they never knew about, which is what the liberal arts education is about? Or are they just here to get job placement and figure out what profession is going to be able to give them that big house, fancy car, latest technologies? And realistically, what do you need to be happy and have a comfortable life versus highly promotable on social media? So I found that very interesting in the prelude. I thought they touched on that a lot, looking at those different areas. I liked on page 29 where they highlighted the students saying that the shutdown during the pandemic actually served as a source of relief and liberation and escape from an increasingly exhausting and soul-sucking grind. Like, if that's what our students feel about their coursework, like, no, they're not getting the spirit of what, in my opinion, college should be about, which is expanding your mind, meeting new people, learning new things. I'll leave on that for enough on that couple others.
speak to the K-12 piece, since I was working in K-12 during COVID. And just, I mean, that is what we do now, that's been drilled into us, that like, we're teaching the test, we're teaching to meet, ideal score on the standardized assessment we take one time per year. And, you know, we built this system that like, with all your students' funding is gonna be based on the test scores, and you're punished if you don't reach these scores. And then in the sense, the students are being punished because then you can start at this level, like, there is no joint learning. So, you know, we don't really ask students to kind of look for passion anymore in education. You know, you go K through 12, you meet all these standards, these Common Core standards now too, also an issue. And then you get to college and it's like I said, it's 4 years. You gotta be done, you gotta know what you do and get out and do it. Then just trying to cram too much stuff in instead of something.
And all of that stuff, and it goes all the way back to No Child Left Behind. All the emphasis is on trying to pull the bottom up without acknowledging that in some cases you need to redefine what that is, because some people, not everyone can or should or wants to achieve to go to college, and that's a whole nother discussion. But what it meant is a lot of the money that used to go into what we used to call gifted programming, or things that could really spark passions, or take that kid who's really creative or really functioning up here and really let them explore who they are and what they're passionate about. All of that money was swept, unless you were a very wealthy businessman, put into, let's bring the bottom up to some unrealistic standard, because we're not acknowledging their needs either. We're trying to put together everybody, and then they carry that in college. And the other thing I wondered with your quote, some of that's about how education is done, but some of that is about over-programmed extracurricular.
Mhm.
The relief of, I don't have to worry about spending every night eating dinner in the car while I get to some extracurricular activity that some adult in my life has determined I need to be doing. And there was an awful lot of that.
Well, and I know that, we still have 2 other small presentations to go today, and don't want to bog us down, but I also want to make sure I'm gonna try to vamp a little bit here for us in case somebody in Zoom wants to say something brilliant. 2 pieces that come from this slide that are really recent for me today. Don Dawson in Academic Advising Services is our professional development king. He signs up for every listserv so that we don't have to get the spam, and then he'll try to distill things down and forward it on. And one of the ones he sent us today, couldn't tell you the source. You don't care, because if I tell you, you're going to instinctively know this to be true. Students are bored in school. They perceive that their peers are bored. This whole thing about what are you here for? Are you here for the joy of learning, or are you just here for some other end that is unrelated to education in general? The other thing that came out from the slide to me is today Dean Davenport had one of the Lunch and Learn series a group of us are doing, where we're learning about the needs of different populations, to look at equity gaps and things like that. And the framework that Sam has presented, remember that she is presenting what the authors have given us, has some bias that was something that we talk about in today's Lunch and Learn, that there's an individualistic goal. I want to achieve these things for me, and it doesn't take into account how many low-income, first-generation Latinx families are more collectively minded, and how they want to do things for the good of the collective. And so maybe even from the beginning, higher education is kind of established in a way that alienates them, or is at odds with their own values.
Which then, this is a slight tangent of mine, which will feed into Greg's part about what really isn't working. We can go to the next slide. Dr. Jonathan Haidt is a social psychologist out at NYU. He's putting out a lot of information right now about how our current college age students and Gen Zs were having struggles long before the pandemic hit. So if you look at the first one, it shows that they were having increased psychological disorders long before the pandemic hit. And then the next one, that is that those undergraduates diagnosed with mental illness again was going up before the pandemic ever hit. And then last one is showing that school alienation worldwide was on the rise before the pandemic ever hit. And a lot of his research is pointing towards the fifth wall that our housing and dining talks about when they talk about things, that our students, even when they're in the same room with people, or all of us as a society, are not interacting with others. And we're reliant upon our mobile devices and social media to, quote, connect with people. And that is what's really feeding into a lot of this. So again, this is more of a societal issue that we're highlighting from the pandemic and highlighting in this book in higher ed, but it's been there for quite some time. And now we need to find solutions, right, to fix it.
We'll see what we can do. Thanks for the handoff, Sam.
Sorry, maybe we get as more.
I'll give it a try, but it probably won't. It's probably just not happy because it doesn't recognize something on a new computer or whatever the case may be. Did we have anybody from Zoom who had anything they wanted to add? All right, there we go. Let me just give this a try, see if it actually. I don't know. It must just like me.
It's yours.
But that might be. You never know. Technology. It's always fun.
Program to your people.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Biometric, yeah.
Exactly. And I'm gonna stand up, and that's not because I think, I have to stand up because I'm the one talking, but my wife will tell you, even when I'm talking on the phone, I have to stand up because that's just how I talk. I don't know why. Drives her crazy.
Makes advising interesting.
It does make advising interesting, right? Yeah. But at any rate, but yeah, just feel free to jump in because definitely it's a conversation. Yeah, so if you hear something interesting, if you have a thought, just jump in. We're just here to discuss things today, so for sure. But yeah, my part is about part 2, which was called "This Really Isn't Working." So I'm sure we all have our own kind of ideas about what we've seen in our experiences that tells us, this really isn't working. But let's see what the authors thought. So basically the author's approach was, there is a big time problem. And to me, what they kind of distilled down as the problem was that as folks in higher education, we all have become part of a process that has turned students into commodities. And those students are commodities whose value is determined by the colleges who bid for them. So that's a direct quote straight out of the book. And so that's kind of how they saw the problem, big picture. So they gave us some reasons, or some symptoms, I should say, really more symptoms of that problem. And so they talked about.
Sorry.
Interesting.
I was trying to make sure I got our screen shared.
I bet. Okay. It works. Beautiful. So one symptom is that administrators feel like they have to make student satisfaction the #1 priority. So essentially they're turning into customer service representatives, which is not really the goal of an administrator. And I think nationwide, if you polled administrators, they'd say that's not really why they went into administration. It was probably not to be customer service reps for students, but in the situation they're facing in higher ed today, that's kind of what they feel their role is. Another symptom is that market pressure from students and parents, and this is a direct quote from another book or research study that was included in here, may compel investment in consumption amenities rather than academic quality. Anybody feel either of those things so far? Anybody see or feel like that's something, whether at Eastern or other schools in general, we kind of run into those issues?
I know as director of an advising center, I've definitely talked to some parents who are taking the standpoint that you should just be mad and yell until you get what you want. I mean,
Right, which kind of leaves you no choice but to try to make their satisfaction the top priority.
I think sometimes also we look at, we need numbers to get revenue to be able to stay afloat. But I think we don't really say, you know, is this the right place for you? Is this the right spot for you? I feel sometimes we say, oh, you're good enough. And then they get all this debt, they get all the student debt, and then they can't succeed. And so that to me feels like a service. That, you know, that we're supposed to try to help them as much as we can, but some of them, it's just not for them, or it's not the right time for them. You know, it could be the right time when they're a little more mature, so it's, you know, to weigh that, but it's like, yes, you know, after college, you have to go to college. And that's not all, I think that's not always, you know, we see students that just don't make it because they're not ready for it.
Right. And so a lot of that, you know, some of that pressure for the student may come from the parent as well. Yeah, so we definitely see the impact of that pressure from students and parents, you know, playing into things. And then, you know, the symptom that kind of clinches it all, higher education is as much in the business of buying students as in the business of selling an education. And so, you know, we would like to think that our goal as an institution is to say, look what we can do for you. Here's the great education you're going to receive here. But what the authors anyway are saying is that we're really just all about finding that student and saying, what can we do to get that student here? What does it take to get the student here? And we know we're in a tough spot. We've heard the bottom line mentioned, and that's how we pay for the bottom line. So we kind of know that's where it's at. But that is kind of where they're coming from when they say everything that higher ed is facing is kind of turning that student into a commodity. And that's really the bottom line. It's how do we get that student and how do we keep them there? So it's not so much about giving them an education. It's about getting them here and keeping them here and moving them through. And that's unfortunate because we all know that's not really what higher ed's about. So once they diagnose the problem, they talk about what that marketplace for students looks like. So if we're out there in the big wide world of admissions, talking to students, what all are they looking at? Well, first off, you've got at the top of that pyramid, they say are the wealthiest private schools. So places like Ivy League schools, they throw Stanford in the mix, folks who can offer as much aid as they want to a teeny tiny percentage of students who can't afford what they would be charging otherwise. And they're going to promise them the moon. And the difference between them and other schools is they can deliver that because they have powerful alumni networks. They have high income employment that they can say, we're going to be able to put you right into that top company, you know, on the New York Stock Exchange, if that's where you want to end up. We're going to put you into this high leverage, high power position, whatever that looks like for you. We can set you up with someone who graduated from here 5 or 10 or 20 or 30 years ago, and we'll get you there. So that's at the top echelon. And then you've got other private colleges. Now, they're not at that top level, but they're going to use merit scholarships. They're not going to look at need. They're just going to say, we got money and we'll give it to you. So would you like to choose us? But they might also use things like location. They talked about a school on the Pacific Ocean that gives out beach towels with their logo on it to basically say, hey, look what you're going to do in between every class you have. You can hang out at the beach here. So different things that they're going to use to try to get students who would otherwise maybe choose those very top tier institutions. And then they put flagship state universities, all right? The places that we all know about because they market their sports teams. You know, we've heard about them. Obviously, we're about an hour from one of those. So they're going to have sports teams, Greek life, in-state tuition, and essentially they can fill as many seats as they want to fill because they can make their requirements wherever they want to, and they will have students fill in those seats. So that's about midway down the pyramid. And then we come to number 4. Okay, regional public institutions like us and community colleges. And these are places they say they're going to use location and price to compete because that's essentially what they have to offer. They don't have money, but they can offer, you know, the lower tuition to try to compete with the folks who are giving away money to make up for their higher tuition. And then at the bottom of the pyramid, they put for-profit institutions, veterans, Pell-eligible students, folks who are not really familiar maybe with the college market. They're going to try to take, in the words of the authors, maybe take advantage of some of those folks and try to get them in the door. So that's kind of what the pyramid looks like. What do you think? I mean, does this seem reasonable? Any thoughts on the pyramid?
We're just talking about four-year schools here, right? We haven't even gotten into community college.
So they lump, interestingly, they lump
Community college with
colleges
the
with regional
Okay,
publics,
sorry.
which is a little bit, you know, as folks at a four-year institution, how can they do that to us, right? But they do. And I guess if you ask students, maybe that's where they see the
Viewers.
comparison. Yeah. So it does put community colleges in that grouping. So then we go on and we kind of get into the meat of what they're talking about here. Now, for some reason, it's not liking me. Oh, there we go. We do have a question here at the bottom. So we kind of talked about, does it make sense? Let's dig a little deeper. You know, what does this hierarchy in the marketplace mean for a school like EIU? How can that be a problem for schools like Eastern or for us in particular? Any thoughts on that?
I think we saw that when the, flagship state universities started lowering their ACT, SAT. We lost a lot of students to that place,
Mhm.
whether it really, they were getting it better, it was more of a name.
Right.
So I feel that we did lose some to that, and then we had to kind of maybe lower our standards so we could, whatever we lost to them, get that back up.
Mhm.
So I think there is a give and take, because there is a threshold of where you have to be to be able to maintain what the stats were, where you are with faculty and administration and all of that. So I think it does kind of move depending on, what's going on. And I think with the cliff coming, that everybody's talking about, I think those top branches always have them, but they may not have as many, so they're gonna do something to keep those, their numbers, and so somewhere that's gonna be taken into.
Right. The further down the pyramid you are, the less students you're ultimately going to have to even be choosing from. Yeah, for sure. So how do we get to this point? How do we get to where it's all about the marketplace and schools are just doing whatever they have to lure students to get there and compete for them? So they came up with about 10 different items. I won't dwell on every single one, but let's kind of look at them just a little bit at a time. So one was rising inequality and the impact of, and they didn't mention the Great Recession specifically, but to me, here at Eastern, I feel like it had a huge impact. Because we see, how Eastern recruited prior to 2008 versus after 2008, huge difference to me. So I think that rising inequality and the impact of the Great Recession definitely had an impact. They talk about the net worth of the median American household is about 30% lower in 2016 than it was in 2007. They didn't use the word Great Recession, but we know that was 2008. So when you compare that, clearly that's going to have an impact financially on students and families. So that's one way. Changing demographics definitely plays into that as well. They talk about that. Fewer than a fifth of today's students are what we would consider traditional students. That's a quote from the book. So full-time students living on campus between 18 and 22 years old, fewer than a fifth of today's students meet that criteria nationwide. That's obviously a huge difference. And when you look at a school like Eastern, predicated on, that traditional student, at least in general, that's, and certainly we can look at the history of Eastern and there's a lot of different time periods there, but most recently, up until within the last probably 15 years, that was the student population that built us up to a 10,000 student institution. And now that's less than a fifth of today's students. Inequalities within the K-12 education system. The fact that they quote, a poor child in a poor district in a poor state receives about $8,000 per year worth of schooling. The figure for rich children in rich states is $18,000. Obviously, money isn't everything, but it's a lot. And so there's a huge inequality there. And that definitely means for many, if you want a quality education, you're going to have to pay for it one way or the other, whether that be private schools or whether that be, a rich school district, one or the other. And obviously, a lot of folks don't have access to that. So that makes a big difference in how things have played out. There's also less government spending on public goods, and that includes higher education. We're probably all familiar with that chart that shows state funding going down. And that's a reality. In Illinois, it's certainly a reality, and it's been a reality for quite some time. That definitely has made a difference. For a long time, the percentage overall has been going down. So that's something they point out as well. The increasing cost of higher education and that decreasing ability to pay for it. So tuition and fees at these are public universities, have more than doubled in constant dollars over the last 30 years. Increasing at a faster rate even than those at private universities, just looking at tuition. In the first decade of the 21st century, almost 80% of tuition hikes at public universities were linked to a decline in state appropriations. So yeah, that's a big difference. 10 years ago, students and their families paid for about a third of the university's operating costs through tuition and fees. Now they cover nearly half of those costs. And that obviously affects the ability of middle income families to afford paying for that education. They had a quote in there I thought was interesting. Salaries and wages have remained almost stagnant for middle income families for 40 years when you look at real buying power of those dollars. And so those are all factors that play in. The ranking system, US News and World Report, the whole gamut, everything is out there online now. That plays into things, what gets valued by the ranking system, what doesn't get valued. Higher education becoming a platform that really reinforces inequality rather than mobility. That was discussed in there. I think that there was something here. Let me see what I've got. There was a quote, I think, or a fact. Yeah, basically the way that, the K-12 education kind of being baked into, admission standards and things like that, low-income students who don't have access to quality education at the K through 12 often don't have access to, the higher education that they need to get help to move out of their maybe low-income situation. So all those things factor in. The gig economy, we've got professors even, they talk about working at multiple schools, adjunct faculty who are no longer part of that tenure track opportunity. They quote, 1970, 3/4 of faculty were either tenured or on the tenure track. In 2017, nationwide, only a third of faculty were tenured or on the tenure track. So that certainly plays into it as well. Student as customer, well, I think we've all seen an example of that. So students often are kind of looking to, feel like they are getting the best out of whatever the situation is, and they're going to go where they can get what they think is the best. And oftentimes that clashes in the classroom. The student thinks they kind of set the tone. Professors feel like they should set the tone. And obviously the way that students look at professors and vice versa, that's impacted as well. Because students think, it's like they're going to the gym. What are you going to do to help me, get the most out of this workout? What are you going to do to help me get the most out of this education? Professors obviously, want to look at it in a little different way. What are you going to do to put into that education? So it all factors in. And then lastly, that economy of self-interest was the 10th item that they talked about. Because really, they talk about how these schools, liberal arts colleges, small liberal arts colleges, essentially have kind of bought into it, and now they're competing against one another, trying to basically get the most out of, the students that they can, bringing them in, and really maybe making decisions based just on what can we do to get the most students, as opposed to what really is going to make the most for them, to give them the best education. So of these 10 items, which ones have the most impact? What do we think? Which ones do we see examples of? How do they impact Eastern? Any kind of additional thoughts or discussion now that we've kind of seen the whole list and what the authors said about it? Feel free to jump in.
Inequalities of K through 12 is kind of what stood out most to me, but that's probably because my history is in K through 12. So a little new here at Eastern as a, working here at Eastern, words are escaping me right now. But yeah, just knowing that like being out there and seeing that, even just, avoid the vast differences between the school districts and the education. And when you get here, having the faculty having to address all of those different needs of our students, they're all coming from different levels of education. It's just hard to meet students where they're at, like you said, we're trying to do that, and we all come from different perspectives.
I think the less government spending on higher ed and then the increase of the families having to do that and not having, because a lot of the middle income families that maybe parents went to college, they wanted to go to college, they're not getting any grants, they're not, the map of all of those, and so they're having to put the bill totally through, which is difficult, so that's going to the student, which gets into student debt, which also gets the anxiety up, or, I need to get this done quickly, or, I'm struggling, but I can't ask for help because I gotta get this finished, because it's all the way to, my parents. I think those are really, if you look at other countries that higher ed is paid for, you go. If you make a certain score and you're in a certain thing, it's taken care of, really work through and they get out. And so we want everybody to go, we expect everybody to go, yet we don't give them needs to go. Or we say, yeah, we can get it, but then it's not, I'm so sitting at my desk to say, I have to $4,000 bill that I don't know where to go. How to pay that. Let's see if we can find that. I think, we give them the mood and then we don't really give them how to pay for that movement, I guess. And I think that they're here for a year, they get all that debt, and they have to really hard things, so.
Or they're here for 4 years and they work 40 hours a week.
Mhm.
And they have no time to do that exploration, to find the joy in learning, because they're just trying to complete the assignment that's due in 4 hours. And they haven't, and then they can't take that assignment that they did yesterday and carry it forward into the lesson today. And that is the real struggle for me in the classroom, is how do you teach people who do not have time to read and reflect on what they're doing.
And I think we see that a lot more now than 30 years ago when I went through. Most people in college, they were in college. If we worked, we may work like 12 hours a week, not very much, but you have 40, they're in their 20s, but they're paying for their college on their own. And, and so I think I see a lot more, even in the last 5 years, a lot more of that. Working 40 hours a week, I can't. But I gotta get done, so I need to take a full load, but.
And what is not clear to us as instructors is, like, what do we do with that, right? Like, how do we teach people who literally cannot, not that they can't read, they don't have time to do it. They don't have the bandwidth to do it, they don't have the time to do it, they don't have the resources to do it, that is the real struggle.
When you're recruiting the student population, it's particularly, I see it with the first grade students that they have no one at home who understands the world they're coming to here. And even if they're coming from a home where someone in the family does have some college experience, what their experience was is very, very different. When we were, their parents. Yes. But when I went through school, you could still, if you were in the public, You could work part-time and cover all your textbooks and cover a lot of stuff. And, you know, then you go back a whole nother generation, my parents' generation, my dad worked 3 part-time jobs and put him through school. But you could do that and still have time to think and everything, because the relative costs compared to your total expenditures for life was so different. And I see a lot with students, they get here and their family doesn't understand that they can't do what they used to do for the family. If they're first gen, especially if they're first generation born here, on top of it, you've got still, you've got to help the family. How many of our students are sending money home to help support the family? And we're recruiting those kids here, but we're not addressing that that's the world they live in. And yet you try to have a conversation, maybe you should only do 12 hours a semester instead of 15. Well, then it's gonna take you an extra year. Yes, but it probably is gonna take you that extra year anyway, because you're not passing your classes because you don't have the bandwidth to really reflect, which is what you have to do in history. You don't have time to think and reflect and synthesize. Yeah, but
About it.
I think especially in yours, it's really, I don't know how you get through it this class. If you don't have the bandwidth to sit there and really study and literally take the time and space to let your churn on something. I don't know how to do it.
Also reflects maybe some differences between the K-12 system and higher ed, right? We're lucky if by the time they get through high school, they've had a history class that asks them to think about why events were happening. Right?
Yeah.
Like, instead of just remember that the events happen, and I know that Stacey's not doing that in her class. She's not asking them to memorize. I mean, yes, they have to remember some stuff, but it's, why were we even having that discussion? Why was that even a thing that happened? And what were all the many factors, some social, some political, right, that led to an issue or led to an occurrence? And because this section is called "This Really Isn't Working," it makes me think with other Julie's comments here about the underfunding or the reduction of funding leads us down a path to something the authors in 2020 didn't know was going to happen, but in 2024, here we sit where FAFSA is a complete mess because middle income students can't get any money to help pay for a now outside of their range product. And so they're trying to revamp it and they're trying to make it better. But of course, it's this huge bureaucratic thing and very different.
And, okay, the thing that has not yet been said is that we live in a neoliberal state. And that is why the state has not been able to fix the FAFSA issue, right? That is why we have the underfunding of our public institutions, why we undermine the idea of the public good, something else that they talked about. And why our students also, like, they're burned out, as we just talked about with Sam, right? What do they have to look forward to after they graduate, right? Like, one of the symptoms of all this is that if the getting a degree reinforces inequality. Is it any more, is a bachelor's degree any more a stepping stone to social upward mobility? And I mean, those are big questions that I don't think, and one of their points is that these are big political questions that require broad political change. And I imagine, I'm not going to imagine that they're going to dial it back and say, well, higher ed.
Right.
Anyway, but those are all things that we can't ignore because it's part of the broader, the causes of how we got.
That is a great tease though. And isn't it exciting that the word manifesto is in it? Like, you could hope you get a few pages in and it's actually calling for revolution and that Greg's gonna put on his gorilla gear. Yeah.
Like the profits of the top 1% and the wages, and I just understand that. Like, because we deal with students who are not in the top 1%. We're working with middle class, lower middle class, who are struggling to strong, but well. So I like so angry the whole day.
I found it interesting in noting that college tuition has more than doubled in the last 30 years.
Mhm.
And then I don't remember the statistic, I was reading a magazine article about this about Pell Grants in maybe the 70s covered like 75% of college attendance. And now they cover less than 25%. And now we're also hopefully tearing down the walls of inequality by saying higher ed should be accessible to many people, but we're not because it costs so much and we don't understand in their cultures taking loans is not okay. And so then when I read in here, and you can't find the stat right now, but it was something like the people who need the loans most are at like a 20% completion rate on the FAFSA. And so we're not recognizing cultures and being competent about cultural limitations to what we're saying we need to do to assimilate. And we're telling them, oh, you need to assimilate, when that's, again, the point of higher ed is we're all supposed to not assimilate, we're supposed to respect each other and learn about each other and appreciate the differences. But we're still doing that. And then when I think about why are the costs rising, and then again, another stat from another magazine article is when we look at who our institutions are employing, and maybe a higher percent of this, but from 1976 to 2018, full-time administrators and other professionals employed by higher ed increased 164% and 452% respectively. While the number of faculty employed at colleges only increased by 92%, which marginally outpaced the student enrollment of 78%. So we wonder why college has more than doubled in cost in the last 30 years. And then we can look at the last 40 years and see exactly why. Like, who are we putting our dollars into to support the students? Is something I think higher ed needs to look at very closely.
And that also goes along with, because I don't want to advocate for cutting the costs.
No,
But it goes along with underfunding, right? Like, why is higher ed so expensive? Well, the state isn't paying into it, and so, you know, like, during the budget impasse, one of the things I would tell my students is, like, when I was an undergraduate at a regional comprehensive university, I got $800 a year for a scholarship, every semester. And that covered tuition and part of my residence hall, and I had a part-time job that paid for the rest, and I came out of both an undergraduate degree and a master's degree without debt. And students cannot do that.
So we need some solutions.
Yes.
But Jesse wants to make sure we understand the words that our authors will be using the rest of the way. So what I'm gonna do is stop sharing the screen because Jesse just wants to talk this out. She doesn't want to kill you with a PowerPoint. Not that the first two killed us, but if we had a third one, maybe it would.
All right, so yeah, so the first two sections kind of cover, you know, what are the problems, how did we get here? And then section 3, hopefully they're gonna have just all of the answers and the great ideas that will magically fix everything. But they kind of start to set the tone for all of that with culture. That culture is kind of what we need to focus on first, changing our culture moving forward. And they discussed 8 different features or characteristics of the culture that they feel like are essential to consider. And then I just thought we could kind of just discuss these things just in general, kind of briefly talk about how they define each of their 8 different areas, but if anyone has just some ideas or just comments you wanted to make about any of them, feel free to chime in. So the first thing they talk about when considering your culture is it authentically motivated? So kind of just the gist behind all of that, being honest and open, being collaborative, but just being real, basically. The second thing was, is it culturally sustaining and non-assimilationist? So kind of what we touched on already, the idea behind college is everyone comes here and you're an individual and your individuality. All of that helps create the culture and we respect everyone's individuality, but we have for years been having everyone kind of fit into a box. We aren't really following that as far as wanting students to be individuals and learning from each other. And, they specifically said, you know, that students should bring academic selves to college and leave behind any attachments they have to their specialization and their uniqueness. So just making sure that we're letting students individually contribute to the culture, and the faculty and other staff as well contribute to that. The third piece that they focus on is it inclusive and anti-racist? So they kind of specifically talk about not just adding diverse faces to the workforce, but, you know, not just to the students and the faculty, but also actively working through these barriers to undo racist practices, to kind of always be looking inward and thinking about what we need to change to make sure we're moving in a more anti-racist direction. The fourth aspect is it integrated? So they say integration at all levels, so within the curriculum, between the curriculum and the co-curriculum, and between the college and the community. And I thought that was kind of an important factor, is, you know, to consider those outside sources also. And they mentioned, you know, we aren't silos. We shouldn't be working in silos between each department or between across campus. It is very important also. The fifth factor is using the backward design thinking. So kind of what is our goal in the long term? What are we trying to reach? But then breaking that down. We would sometimes call that a task analysis. So seeing kind of what each step is that we need to get there. So then it feels more attainable, and you're taking small steps to reach that goal. The sixth component is emphasizes collaborative autonomy. All these things basically focus on being collaborative, but they kind of just point that out again, being collaborative, but also letting people have individual ideas and respecting them, and then working together. Seventh, not being complacent, you know, always trying to do better, always kind of looking to see what else we can do. And then the eighth, it fosters accountability, so holding both ourselves and others to standards, not trying to call people out on things, but working together. If we see something that needs improved or a practice that maybe isn't okay, pointing that out and working together to improve our practices. So those are kind of our 8 factors and characteristics moving forward. And then, you know, moving into our next session, they point out that there are 3 key areas that we're going to need to address considering these cultural factors. And those are the people, the institution, and then the classroom culture.
And I know that you probably breezed through that because we were closing in on our hour. Dr. Jeff Stoll is going to lead us on some discussion about that classroom environment and the culture. We wanted to kind of do those out of order because some faculty may go off contract between now and when we finish the book. And we wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to discuss that with someone who's in the classroom almost every day. And then we'll get to the others as well. I know Ryan Howard has signed on to talk about the people. And I have a volunteer, I believe, for the institution section. So we will have hopefully good discussion about what we can do. As we close this thing out, I noticed that Jesse's face wasn't showing up anywhere, and it made me wonder, was the owl on at any point?
I didn't see it either.
Yeah, I didn't see it moving either. I apologize to those of you out there in Zoom. And actually, when I was operating this laptop, I couldn't always see the chat. And so I had gotten into Zoom on my phone, but it didn't load prior chats. And I completely missed that someone was having trouble hearing Sam. And I think that is because of the owl. We'll make sure we get that fixed next time and do a better job. But any parting remarks or thoughts? I know Jesse threw out a lot at us in 8 minutes.
Just, I guess one other thing I wanted to point out that I liked about this section after they went through all the factors, and then just some other kind of guidelines to keep in mind. One of the things they pointed out, again, with the collaboration, that not just being between here in one campus, but collaborating with other college communities as well, just working together as well.
Okay, I mean, that sounds a little bit like we're trying to undo neoliberalism. Okay, that's an exciting group. Yeah, okay, well, we'll do this again in 1 week, same time and Zoom channel, and we'll have a better working owl. All right. Thank you all and have a wonderful day.